Hi, I'm Mike Vessey, and I'm here today to introduce you to how to grow your capacity for fluid thinking, and in particular, how to navigate dilemmas or polarities. I will cover what these are and how working with them helps us to navigate our own complexity and that of the organizations and systems we operate in. There's a rich seam of work around navigating dilemmas, but today I'm particularly drawing on the work of Brian Emerson in his book Navigating Polarities. In life, we're constantly faced with choices. Some are challenging to decide between. Should I hire person A or B? Should I select one supplier or vendor over another? We may deliberate long and hard, and the decision-making process may be arduous. But once the decision is made, we can move on and get back to business as usual. We call these either-or choices. However, not all choices are resolved with this type of thinking. Cast your mind back to some of those choices that you faced at work, those that may have felt like they kept coming back around. One year one solution and the next year another. They may have engendered heated debate with people seemingly becoming entrenched in their positions and even vilifying the other side. Decision-making may have become protracted and even reached a stalemate and stalled. Examples that we hear time and time again include things like, should an organization centralize or decentralize? Whether to focus on quality or focus on cost? Or whether to empower people or manage through control. People can become passionate about one pole, for example talking enthusiastically about the benefits of empowerment, whilst also being able to talk down the many downsides of being directive. In our broader lives, we may also have come across some of these choices that we kept just revisiting and perhaps never quite found the right balance. For example, whether to focus on work or rest, to focus on the needs of others, or to focus on our own needs. Or a perennial one for me personally, whether to save and have money in the bank, or spend and enjoy life in the moment. If we take a closer look at these organizational and life examples, it becomes apparent they are actually not either-or choices. They are in fact polarities, interdependent pairs, or two sides of the same coin. They require us to think both and. If we ignore one in favour of the other over time, we face challenges, not least in that we find the issues coming back and seemingly never being resolved. Take this illusion as an example. When looking at it for the first time, many people immediately see a tree, while others see two faces. Fairly quickly, most people come to see both because it is an interdependent image. The faces create the tree, and yet the tree creates the faces. It's easy to see both here, but it's just as easy to extrapolate this to real life with real issues, where people get locked into their own perspective. The debate begins as people try to argue for their perspective until someone stops and says, "We have both." As we start to tune into the concept of polarities, it can become quickly apparent they're all around us. As leaders, should we be realistic or optimistic about the future? At work, should we customize our products or standardize? Should we do what's best for the bottom line or for the environment? In our personal lives, should we focus on ourselves or on others? Now, as you hear those, you might be thinking, of course we need both, and you'd be right. You can probably also already see that each of these poles has its benefits and its overuses. Leaders often ask me, isn't this the same as pros and cons? And the answer is definitely no. Overuses are not cons. Instead, they come from too much of that particular pole. For example, too much optimism about the future means we become blind to risks from our competitors, leaving us vulnerable to falling market share. The deeper we get into the overuses of a pole, the better the opposite benefits often look. This is when you notice organizations swinging between poles. How many times have we been in an organization that had a huge decentralization change initiative, and when the downsides of total local control start to take hold, they set up a new program of centralization? That repeated cycle was the first 8 years of my working life. Working skillfully with polarities means that we move away from these pendulum swings towards a way of carefully navigating the best of both poles. Polarities are not new. Masculine and feminine, individual and collective, yin and yang. In 1936, F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote, "The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in the mind and at the same time and still retain the ability to function." Today's increasingly complex world requires both and thinking, and that is exactly why I'm here to talk about it with you today. As important as it might be to embrace polarities and hold a both and mindset, it's much easier to said than done. To some degree, the decks are stacked against us. Our evolution, hardwiring, our language, our education encourage us to see things as either or conspiring against our best efforts to see the world with a both and mindset. Faced with the uncertainty of the both and mindset, we can find ourselves in our stress response and reverting to the relative ease of either or. As we move into holding a both and mindset, we look for the third way. The way that is both. The third way reintegrates the poles, enabling us to have the best of both and to mitigate the overuses of both. Standing here is more than a cognitive exercise or sleight of hand, but a commitment to personal development, to growth, and being with the truth of the interdependent relationship. This is where we harness the real power of polarities. For example, the harmonization of work and rest might be balance in life. Now you might be wondering to yourself, if it's this complicated and difficult, why should I invest time in this? One answer is that generally we find ourselves suffering polarities rather than successfully navigating. We find ourselves preferencing one pole over the other even though we know both are important. We find ourselves attaching to a particular point of view, so much so that we begin to adopt that point of view as part of our personality. The point of view becomes part of our identity or ego and how we make sense of the world. Othering, we seek to make the other point of view wrong so as to validate our own perspective. And either-or-ing, taking sides for or against the issue at hand, where one side wins and the other loses. But first, we need to remember that not all problems are polarities. Some really are an either-or choice. They might be tough choices, but they are still either-or. To start turning into polarities, I ask myself 4 questions. Is the difficulty ongoing? Are there two interdependent alternatives that are linked to each other? Over time, do I need the upsides of both options? And is it a situation of moving from one state to another? So today we've covered a polarity is a situation in which two interdependent and seemingly contradictory states must be maintained for success over time. We need to use both and thinking rather than the either or thinking which works so well for many other problems. Not all problems are polarities. Both and thinking does not come naturally, and many people find it helpful to have a tool to make sense of the polarity. To navigate polarities successfully, we need to find the third way, where we benefit from the benefits of both poles and carefully manage ourselves to avoid overuses. Moving from suffering to navigating polarities leads to better results, improved communication, and stronger relationships. So what is the answer to all of this conflict and complexity? Through this course, we will explore finding a new way of working with polarities, which we call navigating polarities, because they are never fully resolved. Instead, we will look to find ways of responding that brings the benefits of both poles and works to mitigate against the overuses. We will explore the polarities that affect you personally and more broadly your organizations. As you come to see them, we will then share with you a tool to help you move from suffering into navigating these challenges.